So did you know there were 11 commandments? Bet you knew 10 of them, right? They start with, I'm the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. It goes through the list from remember the Sabbath day, to honor your parents, to don't steal, to don't commit adultery, don't bear false witness, don't covet, etc. I didn't get all 10 of them in there, but close. You know what number 11 is? You just heard it. Can you say it? Really?
Wake up.
Martin, go back a couple slides. Keep going. Ah, there. One more, I think.
Couple more.
Where I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. There you go, as I have loved you. Love one another as I have loved you. The 11th commandment. Thank you. Now this one is one that you probably have read before, heard before, and it's gone. Love one another as I have loved you. Oh, isn't that nice? So in good Lutheran fashion, what does this mean?
We are to fear and love God. So.
And they all start, we're quoting from Luther's Small Catechism. We are to fear and love God so that we do not, and then they all end with,
but instead.
No, the ending is always, this is not for the commandments, but this is most certainly true. All right. But what does this mean? Shall love your neighbor as Christ has loved you. Ooh. So let's start with the as part. As Christ has loved you. Because that's where it begins, right? Our love for other people is modeled after what Christ has done for us. Just like our mission statement, right? Our mission is to care for others near and far because Christ has loved us, or Christ cares for us. So it's the same principle. We start first with what Christ has done for us. So, how has Christ loved us? How did Jesus love us? I think he loved us to death. I think he loved us to death. Now, let me set the stage for you. This passage from the Gospel of John happens on that last night when Jesus is with his disciples in the upper room. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record that on that last night they shared a supper together, and in that supper Jesus took the bread and took the wine, and you know the story. Okay? John doesn't have that. Did you realize that? John doesn't have the bread and the wine. Instead, the Gospel of John records that last night together as a meal, but interestingly enough, he focuses on how Jesus starts that meal, and he starts it down on his knees, washing his disciples' feet. And then he gets up and he takes off the towel and says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you should love one another as I have loved you." And not too long later, they go out to the garden, he's arrested, and we know the rest of that story. He loves us to death. Now that's kind of a double entendre, I realize. He loves us to death, and he loves us to death. Literally. But before that, he shows us another kind of love, a servant kind of love, down on his knees, washing the dirty, ugly feet of his disciples. Does that mean you and I need to be down on our knees, washing feet? Well, there's a reason we don't do that any longer on Good Friday at Crossroads, because your pastor can't get down on her knees anymore. Does that mean I can't show Christ's love to the world any longer because I have had 2 titanium knees put in my knees and I can't kneel on them anymore? No, that's not literally what we're talking about. Love one another as I have loved you. It's a sacrificial kind of love. And it is with that same kind of sacrifice that we love other people. Putting other people first. Now, there's probably 50 different ways that we can do that, and I'm just going to talk about 2 today. One is what comes out of our mouths, what we speak, and the other is what we do. Okay? So what we say and what we do. The first, what we say. 2 guys got onto a train in London. Now, in London, the trains are different than they are in the United States. In the United States, you have a whole bunch of rows that look like pews, like this, all facing the same way, and the train goes in that direction. Sometimes, if you're lucky enough, you have one of those that you can switch it, and you can turn around and face your friends. But for the most part, all the seats face this way. And you've got this long car full of seats. In London, they have compartments where 2 seats face each other, and they have a compartment around them. So it's like a little room. And you may not necessarily be in this little room compartment with people you know. So these 2 guys go into this little compartment, sit down, and sitting across from them is this very stately-looking gentleman. Very well-dressed, very quiet, reflective. One of them leans over to the other and says, "I'll bet that's the Archbishop of Canterbury." And the other looks at him and says, "No, I don't think so." "I do." "No, I'll betcha." "Okay, you're on." So one of them finally has the courage to say, "Excuse me, sir, are you the Archbishop of Canterbury?" And all of a sudden, out of this man's mouth come words like, "What difference does it make to blankety blank you? It's none of your blankety blank business. Mind your own." To which the one guy turns and says, "I don't think he answered my question." My friends, what comes out of your mouth can tell a lot about who you are. I remember as a child, when I was a teenager, maybe I was even in college, I finally had the courage to use foul language in my home. Whoa! You all remember these kinds of incidents. You're laughing at me. My mother, of course, I was so proud. I knew these words. And I used them what I thought was appropriately. My mother was standing in the kitchen, and she turned and she looked at me and she put her hands on her hips like this, and she said, "Nancy Beth," that's my middle name, "Nancy Beth, there are a lot of words in the English language, and you need to use those. Find another." The way I got told.
You only display your ignorance, Mary Ellen, by the words that you have used.
Oh, see, all of our parents had something that was said to us. The same principle.
Same
yes,
principle.
Exactly the same principle. What comes out of our mouth says a lot about who we are. Now, I defended those words to my mother by saying, "But they're so expressive, Mother. They say what I really feel, and deep down inside it just erupts." And I laughed when the same kind of words came out of my son's mouths. I'm thinking, is this in our genetics? But you know, what is coming out of our mouth says something about our respect for our God, whose name is often part of that. And it also says something about our respect for those other people. So when we use that kind of language, including when we go OMG in a text or in an email, which, by the way, for those of you who don't know, OMG stands for Oh My God. It's one of those shorthand things. When we do that, what we are saying by our words is that we are not showing the love that Christ showed us, because Christ's love for other people was sacrificial. "But I needed to use those words," I told my mother. And she said, "No, you didn't." Sometimes we have to sacrifice even our own desires, our own selfishness, for the sake of our God and other people. And that does include how we use our language. Now, that isn't the only way that we can show our love for God, by what comes out of our mouth. There are lots of other ways to use words to share that love of Christ. But in today's world, over and over again, I keep hearing the blankety blank, or in the television shows, they bleep them out. And so it has occurred to me that that has become prevalent in our world, and we don't even hear it anymore. And in fact, we use it all the time. Even I, not in the presence of my mother, but even I, occasionally will use those words. What do people hear? When the Archbishop of Canterbury, supposedly, sitting in that train car, has to be bleeped. Yeah, he answered the question. And the question was, I'm not the Archbishop of Canterbury. Because in my opinion, the Archbishop of Canterbury would not be using those bleep words. Nor should we. People watch us. People listen to us. You remember the old song, "They'll know we are Christians by our love"? Yep. Well, it was very, very popular back when I was a teenager. Some of you probably can sing it with me if I were to try, but "They'll know we are Christians by our love" implies that the world is watching. They want to know if we're Christians. And one of the ways they're going to know if we're a Christian is by our love. And what does that mean? It means be careful what comes out of your mouth. Because they want to know about this God of love. They want to know about the sacrificial love of Christ. They want to know how Christ loved them to death. And when we are not respecting God and not respecting others by the language we use, they don't see that love. What about what you do? Somewhere recently, and I can't remember where I read this, so I can't even quote it for you. I can't cite it, the article for you. But I read an article about a company that was downsizing. And there were two gentlemen, both had equal jobs. One had slight seniority over the other. And as the company needed to downsize, one of these two jobs needed to be eliminated. As they waited for those pink slips, they waited with anxiety, as only you can imagine. It was the one with less seniority that received that pink slip, because they said they needed the experience of the one with slightly more seniority. The problem was the gentleman with less seniority was married and had 4 kids. The one with slightly more seniority was single. Interestingly enough, the article cited the fact that the single guy with more seniority, whose job was maintained, went to management and said, "Give that pink slip to me. He needs the job. I can find enough." That kind of behavior, my friends, as hard as it is to do, because most of us have self-preservation built into our DNA, as hard as that is to do, that is a great example of the sacrificial love of Christ for the world. To put yourself out for the sake of another. Wow. Now, in the last few weeks, again, we have been reminded about all those first responders who do the same kind of thing. You heard about them in Boston. Everybody else is running away from the explosions, and where are the first responders running? Into. These are people who think that it's more important to care for you than it is to run away and save their own lives. And not all of us are built to do that. I couldn't be a first responder. First of all, I can't run. But second of all, my instinct takes me away, not into. But some people are built that way. So not all of us, I thank the Lord, by the way, for all of those who are willing and able to do that. They save many, many lives. And Boston was another example of that. But not all of us are equipped to do that. But all of us are equipped in some way, shape, or form to sacrifice ourselves for someone else. Whether it's a job situation, whether it's your kids or your grandkids who say to you, I need a ride, but you've already got an appointment. How many of you would immediately call and cancel your appointment to take the kids? Love one another as I have loved you in a sacrificial way, loving people to death. That's what Christ did for us. And this was the 11th commandment. This is not an option. This is what is expected. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not what's expected so that you can be saved and have eternal life and all that. You know that, I hope. I hope and pray that you realize this is not something you have to do so that you get Christ's love. No. This is something you do because you've got it already. It's a challenge to us. Let that 11th commandment roll in your head for the next week or two. Love one another as I have loved you. And look at your own life. Look at the words that come out of your mouth. Look at the behaviors in your life. And ask yourself, am I loving others in the same sacrificial way that Jesus loved me to death? And if you're not, I challenge you to change those behaviors. I challenge you to change those words. Is it easy? Will you fall and stumble? I do all the time. And you will too. But this is what Jesus asks of us. We love one another as he loved us. Amen.